Is it a brief moment, followed by adjustment? Or does it linger? Do they carry the frustration into the next interaction? Do they let it color everything afterward? That tells you whether the inconvenience was the problem, or whether it simply exposed an underlying habit. Because the moment itself ends quickly. The response doesn't have to. And when someone repeatedly lets small disruptions dictate their mood, they're telling you something important. They're showing you how easily their internal balance is thrown off. That's not something they choose in the moment. It's something they've practiced, which is why this behavior is so consistent. But what's even more revealing is how they behave once the inconvenience passes, and that's where the next behavior comes in. Behavior number 3. Whether they actually listen or just wait to talk. This one is easy to miss, because on the surface it looks like listening. They're nodding, they're quiet, they're facing you. But pay closer attention. Are they present with what you're saying, or are they just holding the space until it's their turn? You can feel the difference immediately. Real listening has weight. It slows the interaction down. Performative listening feels light, restless, like something is being paused, not received. Carl Jung believed attention reveals value, not declared value, actual value. What someone truly cares about gets their full attention without effort. And here's the subtle tell. When you finish speaking, do they respond to what you said? Or do they respond to what they were already thinking? Because those are two very different things. One requires presence. The other requires patience. And patience alone isn't listening. Jung understood that people often listen through the filter of their self-image. They're not absorbing information, they're scanning for relevance to themselves. You'll see it when the conversation stops revolving around them. Do they stay engaged? Do they ask questions that move the conversation forward? Or does their energy drop the moment they're no longer centered? That drop is important. It tells you whether the interaction is mutual or transactional. And here's what makes this behavior so revealing. Listening requires vulnerability. It means setting aside your internal narrative long enough to let someone else's in. Some people find that uncomfortable, so they don't listen. They wait. They prepare responses. They rehearse opinions. They interrupt without realizing it, not because they're rude, but because silence feels like loss of control. Jung believed unexamined habits quietly dominate behavior, and this is one of the most common ones, because when someone consistently listens only enough to reply, they're showing you how they relate to others, not as individuals, but as mirrors, and that pattern doesn't stay in conversation. It shows up in collaboration, in conflict, in moments that require understanding instead of speed. So next time you're talking to someone, notice the pauses. Notice what fills them. That space tells you more than the words, and the next behavior reveals what happens when that space disappears completely. Behavior number 4. How they act when no one is keeping score. This is where things get real, because without an audience there's nothing to perform for. No recognition, no praise, no consequence waiting at the end. Just behavior. How someone acts when no one is keeping score tells you what's actually internalized, not what they've learned to display. Carl Jung warned that unseen habits quietly steer our lives. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." When there's no external pressure, internal defaults take over, and those defaults don't argue. They don't negotiate. They just run. This is why private behavior is so revealing. No one is watching closely. No one is reacting. No one is reinforcing anything. so effort becomes optional. And when effort is optional, values decide whether it's still applied. Some people maintain the same standards regardless of visibility. Others slowly let them slip. Not dramatically, not all at once, but just enough to notice if you're paying attention. And here's the uncomfortable truth. People often assume they're being consistent because their intentions are consistent. But consistency isn't about intention. It's about repetition. Jung believed that what we repeat becomes automatic, and what becomes automatic no longer feels like a choice. So when someone repeatedly cuts corners when it doesn't seem to matter, they're rehearsing that behavior. They're making it familiar, and familiarity always wins under pressure. That's why this behavior predicts future decisions better than promises ever could. Because promises are made publicly. Habits are practiced privately. And there's another layer to this. Let me tell you something most people miss. You don't learn who someone really is when life is dramatic. You learn it when nothing important seems to be happening. Carl Jung put it simply, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. And that's what this video is about. Not big speeches, not public moments, not carefully curated versions of people, but 7 small behaviors that quietly reveal who someone really is. And once you see them, you won't be able to unsee them, especially the last one. Behavior number 1, how they treat people who can't do anything for them. If you ever want to understand someone quickly, this is where you look. Watch how they treat people who have no influence over their outcome, no status, no leverage, no benefit waiting at the end. Because when there's nothing to gain, behavior stops being calculated. This is where courtesy becomes revealing. Some people are respectful only when it's useful. Others don't even think about whether it's useful. And that difference matters. Carl Jung said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." Almost everyone knows how to speak the language of respect. Very few people live it when there's no return on investment. Listen to their tone. Watch their patience. Notice whether respect feels steady or selective. This isn't about catching someone on a bad day. It's about what repeats when no one is paying attention. Jung believed personality doesn't announce itself. It leaks out through habits. Anyone can perform kindness when it's visible. Character shows up when performance is unnecessary. And here's what makes this behavior so powerful. Most people don't realize these moments count. They think the interaction is invisible. They think it doesn't matter, which means they stop managing themselves. And when self-management drops, truth shows up, because effort reveals values. When effort becomes optional, values decide whether it's still given. And you can see it in small details. Do they acknowledge people fully or rush past them? Do they show basic consideration or treat the moment as disposable? Those tiny choices stack up. Jung understood that what we do in these moments isn't random. It's rehearsed by repetition. You're watching something they've done 100 times before. That's why it's reliable. And here's something uncomfortable. This behavior isn't just about how they treat others. It's about how they measure their own worth. When someone only shows respect upward, they're revealing how conditional their standards are. Respect, in that case, isn't a value. It's a transaction. But when respect flows, regardless of advantage, it's part of their identity. And identity doesn't switch on and off. That's why this behavior predicts so much. How someone treats people who can't do anything for them often mirrors how they act when no one is watching. It's the same muscle. And once you notice it, you start seeing it everywhere. In conversations, in group settings, in everyday interactions people assume don't count. Because they do. And the moment you realize that, You understand why this behavior sits at the top of the list. But don't get comfortable. The next behavior reveals something even more automatic. Behavior number 2. How they handle minor inconveniences. This one shows up everywhere, and most people don't even realize they're revealing anything. Watch what happens when something small goes wrong. Not a crisis, not a setback, just a minor inconvenience, a delay, a mistake, a plan that doesn't go perfectly. These moments feel too small to matter, which is exactly why they matter. Because no one prepares a personality for a minor inconvenience. There's no script for it, no time to think, no image to protect. The reaction is immediate. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Small disruptions don't create behavior. They expose default settings. Do they tighten up instantly? Do they look for someone to blame? Do they treat the moment like a personal insult? Or do they adjust without making it a performance? Here's the key point. Anyone can stay composed when things go their way. Character shows up when expectations are interrupted, because inconvenience removes control, and how someone handles loss of control tells you a lot about how they relate to the world. Some people interpret inconvenience as an attack. Others treat it as background noise. That difference isn't about patience. It's about entitlement. Jung believed that repeated emotional reactions form internal patterns, and those patterns don't disappear just because the situation is small. They scale. A person who explodes over something minor doesn't suddenly become grounded under pressure. They're rehearsing the same response at different volumes. And here's the part most people overlook. Watch how long the reaction lasts. How someone behaves when no one is watching is often how they behave when they think the moment is beneath them, when they think it's too small to matter. But small moments are where patterns form. They're training grounds. And once you see that, you realize something important. No one suddenly becomes consistent when it counts. They simply repeat what they've already practiced, which brings us directly to the next behavior. Because the moment someone feels even a little bit of control, those private habits don't stay private for long. Behavior number 5, how they respond to small shifts in control. This is where hidden patterns surface, not with big power, not with authority, but with just a small shift, a little more say, a little more influence, a little more room to decide. Most people think power changes behavior. Carl Jung saw it differently. Circumstances don't create traits, they reveal them. When someone gains even a small amount of control, watch closely. Do they become more rigid, more dismissive, more relaxed, or more considerate? You're not seeing a transformation. You're seeing permission for habits that were already there to come forward. Some people use control to stabilize situations. Others use it to assert themselves. And the difference shows up immediately. The tone shifts. The patience changes. The flexibility disappears or expands. Jung believed that parts of personality stay hidden until conditions allow them expression. That's why small changes matter. They remove restraint without triggering self-awareness. People still feel like themselves, which means they don't monitor their behavior. And that's when it's honest. This is also where charm often fades, because charm is easy when there's no advantage. But when someone feels even slightly elevated, their priorities reveal themselves. Do they listen less? Do they interrupt more? Do they become focused on being right instead of being effective? Those are not accidents. They're familiar responses stepping into open space. And here's the key insight. Watch how quickly they revert once the control disappears. Do they adjust smoothly, or do they cling to it? because the inability to let go of control is just as revealing as the desire to gain it. Both point to the same thing, a relationship with power that hasn't been examined. Jung believed unexamined patterns run automatically, and when those patterns involve control, they rarely stay small, they scale, which is why the next behavior is so telling. Because when control is questioned or outcomes don't go as planned, language changes, and language never lies. Behavior number 6. How they talk about credit and responsibility. Listen carefully to the words people choose, not the big statements, the small ones, because language is where self-image quietly protects itself. When things go well, notice how credit is described. Is it shared naturally? Is it claimed subtly? Is it framed as obvious? And when things don't go well, listen even more closely. Do explanations appear immediately? Do responsibilities shift just slightly? Carl Jung understood that people instinctively defend their sense of self, not out of malice, out of habit. So pay attention to patterns in phrasing. Who becomes the subject of success? Who becomes the subject of mistakes? This isn't about blaming anyone. It's about noticing consistency. Some people take responsibility quickly and without drama. Others soften it, redirect it, wrap it in context. And the key detail is how effortless it feels, because practiced language flows smoothly. Jung believed that what we repeat internally becomes automatic externally. So when someone consistently frames outcomes the same way, they're revealing a long-standing pattern. And here's where people often get misled. Confidence can sound like accountability. Explanation can sound like ownership. But real responsibility doesn't rush. It doesn't decorate itself. It states what happened and moves forward. Watch how often someone needs to be seen a certain way through their words, because that need shows up everywhere. In collaboration, in conflict, in moments where clarity matters more than appearance. Language isn't just communication, it's self-defense. And once you hear it that way, it becomes impossible to ignore. Which brings us to the final behavior, the quietest one, and the most reliable. Behavior number 7, consistency when nothing is at stake. This one is easy to overlook, because nothing seems to be happening. No pressure, no audience, no outcome riding on the moment. And yet this is where everything is decided. How someone behaves when nothing is at stake tells you what remains when all incentives are removed. Not what they can rise to, not what they promise, but what they default to. Consistency in low-stakes moments is rare, because it requires no external motivation. There's no reward pulling behavior forward, no consequence pushing it back. Just habit. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." That fear shows up here, because consistency means there's no one else to blame. No situation to point to, no reason to adjust the mask. Some people stay the same across situations, regardless of whether it matters. Others subtly shift, depending on visibility, importance, or advantage. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough to notice over time. And Jung believed time is what reveals truth. Patterns don't show up in single moments. They reveal themselves through repetition. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. Anyone can show up strong once. Anyone can behave well under pressure. But consistency asks a different question. Who are you when effort feels unnecessary? Who are you when nothing is being measured? Who are you when no one would notice if you slipped? That's not a moral test. It's a psychological one. Because what repeats without resistance is already integrated. It doesn't require willpower. It doesn't require reminders. It's simply how someone moves through the world. And here's the uncomfortable insight. Inconsistency isn't always deception. Often it's fragmentation, different behaviors for different contexts, different standards for different situations. Jung believed this kind of fragmentation creates internal tension, even when people aren't aware of it. That tension leaks out as unpredictability. One day someone is grounded, the next day they're not. Not because circumstances changed, but because incentives did. Consistency, on the other hand, creates trust. Not because it's impressive, but because it's predictable. You know what to expect. And predictability is what allows others to relax around someone. Because there's no guessing, no recalibration, no wondering which version is going to show up. And here's why this behavior sits at the end of the list. It summarizes all the others. How someone treats people without advantage, how they handle inconvenience, how they listen, how they act without an audience, how they respond to control, how they use language around responsibility. All of that collapses into one question. Are they the same person when it doesn't matter? Because when life strips away pressure, urgency, and reward, what remains is who they've practiced being. And that's the part no one can fake for long. Not because they don't try, but because habit always wins. So if you want to understand someone deeply, don't watch them when everything is on the line. Watch them when nothing is. That's where character quietly lives. So how to deal with people after you see their true character. So, you've been paying attention. You've noticed the patterns. You've seen who someone really is when the masks drop. Now what? Step 1. Adjust your expectations. Jung reminded us that understanding is better than judgment. You don't need to punish anyone for being themselves. You just need to know what you're dealing with. Step 2. Protect your energy. If someone consistently behaves in ways that drain or frustrate you, you have a choice. You can step back. You can limit exposure. You can decide where and how to engage. This isn't cold. It's strategic. Step 3. Decide on boundaries. Consistency matters not just in them, but in you. If their habits cross lines you can't accept, it's okay to enforce limits. Sometimes the most powerful move is simply deciding how much influence they have over your life. Step 4. Communicate carefully. When patterns affect collaboration, projects, or relationships, address what you see, without trying to change them. Facts and behavior, not intentions or excuses, because people rarely change who they are, but they can respond when clarity is offered. Step 5. Use what you learn as a mirror. Jung would say, every observation is a chance to examine yourself. Ask, am I consistent when nothing is at stake? Do I treat people fairly without benefit? The stronger your self-awareness, the less power these patterns have over you. And here's the final thought. Observing character is a tool, not a weapon. It's about navigating life wisely, not judging, not controlling, just understanding. Because once you see who someone really is, you can engage with them without illusions, and that's when relationships, work, and life become clearer, calmer, and far less exhausting. And once you start noticing, remember, this isn't about judging. It's about understanding. Adjust your expectations, protect your energy, set your boundaries, and use what you see as a mirror to examine yourself. Jung said it best, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. The truth is in the small actions, the repeated patterns, the quiet moments. Not the grand gestures, not the performances, not the promises,